Hey, welcome back. We're moving on to our next topic, which is section 3.2 on cell division. We've learned about the outcome of asexual reproduction. We learned that asexual reproduction has the outcome of producing offspring that's genetically identical to the parent. We've also seen that the outcome of sexual reproduction is the production of offspring that are genetically different from their parents. So now it's a matter of discovering why it happens this way. Why is it that in asexual reproduction, parents and offspring are identical genetically, but in sexual reproduction they're different? So why is that? And it turns out the reason is, as we can tell, by cell division. And it's interesting as well because as science progresses, um, science changes as well. We'll talk about that in the next slides. Here are the learner outcomes. Please go ahead and pause the video and read those. So science is something that always changes. A long time ago, in the 1600s, scientists had thought and they had hypothesized that really that one parent was responsible for the offspring. So they actually thought that sperm held the fetus. Okay, and as we learned in the last section, um, this is not the case. What happens is you have the formation of a zygote from the synthesis or the fertilization of sperm, which has a haploid number of chromosomes. In other words, it has 23 chromosomes, and it fertilizes an egg cell, which also has 23 chromosomes. They fuse together to form the diploid zygote, which has 46 chromosomes, which goes on to multiply and divide mitotically through the process of mitosis, which is actually what we're talking about today, to form an embryo. But they actually thought that the fetus was in the head of the sperm cell. And it wasn't until Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope that they could actually take a look at these cells, and they didn't find any fetal structures. So that changed things. It changed the way scientists thought, and it changed their hypotheses, and that's a scientific process. They had to go back and reevaluate what they had thought and come up with different hypotheses and come up with different experiments to go ahead and test that hypothesis. That's the scientific method. That's what happens. You have a question. Based on what you know about that question, you come up with an educated guess, a hypothesis. And then from that hypothesis, you generate methods of testing it, and then you come up with data, and on that data, you analyze it. And then based on the analysis of the data, you come up with a conclusion that can either support or not support your initial prediction, your initial hypothesis. If it supports your hypothesis, well, there you go. If it doesn't support it, you've got to go back to the hypothesis and change it. And that's exactly what happened here in this example. Okay, so cell division and asexual reproduction. So here we have a paramecium. Okay, and the paramecium is a unicellular organism that reproduces asexually by binary fission. So we learned about binary fission as being one of the examples of asexual reproduction. The contents are divided equally between the two cells. So if you think about it, and you have a cell with chromosomes, so let's say we have two different chromosomes here in our cell, and here is one chromosome, and then we have another chromosome. If you had binary fission taking place here, and you had the production of two offspring from binary fission, and it was to divide straight down the middle, forming a cleavage like here, and you'd get something like this, right? Well, you can see that that's seriously wrong, because what happened here is, you know, the half of the genetic material goes to one cell and half of the genetic material goes to another cell, so that the individual will only have half the DNA of the parent cell and half the genetic information it would need to function. So this has to be avoided. And to avoid this, the parent, actually what happens to avoid this kind of situation, because this is a situation we do not want. This is not good. Okay? No. But to avoid that kind of situation, what happens is the parent cell, okay, having those two chromosomes, there's one chromosome, there's the other chromosome, will actually go ahead and form copies of it. So there's one copy of the chromosome, and then it's going to form another copy of the chromosome. Okay? And what happens eventually is when the cell divides, each new cell will get a copy of each of the chromosomes. So through the process of binary fission, what ends up happening is you get something like this, right? Like that, and then you have two paramecium that are exactly genetically identical to the parent paramecium. Now, there is a lot of stuff that happens in this section here. I just drew an arrow, but that's what we're going to be talking about in these slides right now. We're going to be talking about all the steps that happen in this arrow here. So, if its DNA was divided between the two organisms, each individual will have half of DNA. We talked about that. So that's what happens. To avoid that, parent needs to make a copy. So for a very short time, parent actually has twice the amount of DNA that it usually has. Okay? The process by which cells divide so that an exact copy of the genetic material is passed from the parent to the offspring is called mitosis. There's a new word for you, mitosis. You need to know that. Okay, so that just is when a cell divides and each new cell gets one complete copy of the DNA. So all the genetic information that's from the parent gets passed on to the offspring. The process that produces two new cells with the same number of chromosomes is called mitosis. The critical part here is the process that produces two new cells with the same number of chromosomes, okay? Because we're going to be talking about another process where actually cell division happens and you do not get the same number of chromosomes. In fact, you get half the chromosomes, but that's in another process. So mitosis happens and it causes the offspring to have the exact same number of chromosomes as the parents. Mitosis occurs in the body cells. You also need to know this. Where mitosis happens, where does it happen? It happens in the body cells of multicellular organisms and is responsible for the growth and cellular repair of a multicellular organism. So whenever you have damaged cells and cells need to repair it, they cannot repair it without mitosis. Remember, mitosis produces two offspring cells with the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. The same number right here, the same number, very important. Okay, that's mitosis. So mitosis is synonymous with having the same number of chromosomes. Okay? Chromosomes. Ugh, it's difficult with a mouse. Okay, so here's a diagram of mitosis. I'm going to star this here because you do need to know this diagram. Okay? You need to know what's happening. And if you look on page 46 of your textbook, has a really nice diagram of both processes we're going to be talking about. It talks about mitosis, which is what happens in sexual reproduction, and it shows you a diagram of meiosis, which happens in sexual reproduction. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about mitosis here. Okay, again, it happens in the body cells of organisms, and it's responsible. Its end product is going to have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cells. So here we go. We have the DNA. This is the original parent cell right here. So this is our parent cell here. Okay. So the parent cell in this phase just does its everyday kind of thing. It does its everyday function. Okay, so all the necessary functioning of the cells happens in this phase. In the next phase, what happens is you get DNA replication. So each of these strands of DNA, which are the chromosomes, they replicate. In other words, the parent just forms copies of each other. Okay, so there you go. In this stage here, the DNA is copied. Once the DNA is copied, you start to get the formation of cleavage, right? The cleavage is right here. So cleavage forms right there, and that's just where things are going to butt off. Well, the cleavage mostly forms in this area here during mitosis. So what happens is these fibers start to form. Okay, and you don't need to know what they are right now, but they're actually called microtubules, and these microtubules form and they stretch out from the ends of the cell, right? Because it's still one cell. And what they begin to do in the next phase is they attach themselves to the chromosomes. And after they attach themselves to the chromosomes, what happens is the microtubules start to retract back to opposite ends. Because they're attached to the chromosomes, what happens is as they retract back, it separates the copies of the chromosomes to opposite sides of the cell. And what happens is as that's happening, as the chromosomes are being pulled to opposite ends of the cell, the cleavage forms. And what happens is as the cleavage forms, it gets deeper and deeper, and eventually the two cells just kind of detach from one another. They kind of snap off in a way. And when they snap off, and when that happens, you get, look at this, the same number of chromosomes in the offspring as originally in the parent cell. Okay, so if you notice this, the offspring have the same number of cells, sorry, not of cells, of chromosomes as the parent cell. So what happens here is that you have 23 pairs of these, if this was a human, right? 23 pairs of these. Okay, and then it gets doubled. Then after it gets pulled off to the opposite end of a cell, and then you get back to 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, and that's pretty much for mitosis. Two terms you do have to know are diploid and haploid. Okay, so diploid means you have two pairs of chromosomes. Okay, so diploid, right, that's written for you up there, is you have two pairs of chromosomes. Okay, two pairs of chromosomes. Haploid, okay, just means you have one pair of chromosomes. Okay, so there are two definitions you do need to know: haploid and diploid. Okay, so cell division and sexual reproduction in plants and animals. So both plants and animals can reproduce sexually. So some plants do not produce sexually; they produce asexually. But now we're going to move on to how things happen in sexual reproduction. So during sexual reproduction, specialized sex cells called gametes, which we talked about in the last section. So one gamete would be a sperm cell, and another gamete would be an egg cell. They unite, they fertilize, so the sperm fertilizes the egg to form a zygote, which then develops into a new organism. One parent, the male, provides the male gamete, and the other parent, the female, provides the female gamete. Okay? If the sex cells contain the same amount of DNA as every other cell, then the zygote will receive twice as much DNA as it needs. So we don't want that. Okay, so if we had gametes with a diploid number of chromosomes, then that means if they were to divide, right, if the zygote divides eventually to form the zygote with a diploid number of gametes, that means that the offspring would have twice as much DNA as it needs. You don't want that, okay? So there is another cell division that happens in sexual reproduction to make sure that the amount of DNA or the amount of chromosomes that are in the offspring equals to that of the parent. But first, you have to go through something called meiosis. So this is the other kind of cell division that happens. So meiosis is a type of cell division that produces cells with only half the DNA of a normal cell. So half the DNA of a normal cell. When the male and female gametes unite, the sperm and the egg, the zygote has a complete set of DNA. Okay? Meiosis involves two cell divisions, not just one. Okay? A gamete must contain only one copy of each different chromosome. To do this, cells have to divide twice. So let's see how this is going to look like. Okay, once again, this diagram is on page 47 of your book. Just meiosis happens for sexual reproduction. So this is in asexual reproduction, and this is sexual reproduction here. So this is asexual. Okay. Okay. And this is sexual reproduction. Okay. So in meiosis, we have the parent cell. Okay. Now, the first stage of meiosis is the same as the first stage of mitosis. So what happens is the DNA is going to double itself. Okay, it's going to double itself. Okay, so what happens here is you get the formation of daughter cells. Okay, you get the formation of daughter cells. Now, what happens in this stage here is something called crossing over. Okay, and that's shown very nicely. Oh, I apologize for that. That's an S. I'll try that again. No, I'll erase the whole thing. Crossing over. Okay. Okay. So crossing over means that segments of DNA will actually overlap. Okay, and when that happens, the actual genes and the chromosomes could kind of sort of switch locations in a sense. And then once they switch locations, you have different order of those base pairs that we talked about before. And so the genetic code looks a little bit different, and that will result in having the offspring look and have different characteristics than the parent cell. So after the two daughter cells divide into four daughter cells, okay, and this is just to make sure that the zygote receives the correct amount of genetic information, not double. Okay, and so this cell number here of the daughter cells, these are haploid cells because you have half the number of chromosomes. This is haploid. Okay, so instead of 46, okay, in mitosis you start off with 46 chromosomes here. Okay, and then you end off with 46 chromosomes. Okay, assuming they're human. Well, in this example, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've got 4 in the offspring here. Here we also have 4, right? So in other words, this would be 46 chromosomes. Let's represent that. And then afterwards, it goes through the process of meiosis, and then you have 4 daughter cells with half the chromosomes. So the haploid number for humans would be 23. And here they're representing haploid by having halving them in half, and then you got 2 chromosomes there. So that's meiosis and mitosis. There are actual steps, phases involved in asexual and sexual reproduction. It's interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. You do not have to know those for grade 9 science. You will definitely be exploring those in high school science. If you take biology courses in high school and science 20, you'll explore those there a little more. Okay, see you next time.